All right, I will say good morning. Let us begin. We Mesillas Yesharim today have the great schos to finish Parak Chafei, chapter 25, Mesillas Yesharim. So remember again, in this particular parak titled B'derech Knias Hayira, how does one acquire a sense of Yiras Hashem, a sense of reverence? Remember again, in Yira, Yira, remember again, can mean a number of different things, as we've spoken about. Yira can mean Yiras HaOnesh, Yiras HaRomimos, and Yiras HaChet. So the Ramchal in this particular chapter is positing that the way to do that is constant contemplation about the ever-presence, the omniscience, omnipresence, and omnipotence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Hashem sees everything, right? Experiences everything, and by definition, when I know that everything in my life is seen and experienced by an all-knowing God, that creates a sense of behavioral awareness. So Ramchal goes on, he says, "V'amdam hadavra hazeh eino mitztayer heit v'seichel ha'adam ela ayidei asmadas hisboninos v'hastaklos hagadol." But this idea, this concept, that Hashem sees everything, that Hashem knows everything, that Hashem experiences everything that I undergo in my life, this idea could really only be internalized through constant and consistent review of it. In other words, this is something that I have to review in my own mind and reinforce within myself constantly. Because since this is not something I could perceive with my senses, it only becomes part of my consciousness when I think about it and review it often. And even after I acquire this level of understanding, if I don't review and reinforce, it can very easily dissipate. So therefore it turns out that since the way to acquire this yira is constant review. I will say, it's very reminiscent of what we were learning last night in Chassidus in the Piagetz. This idea that sometimes in life you just have to review a concept over and over and over in order to make it part of your consciousness. So Ramchal says that's what's happening over here. How do you acquire Yiras HaChet? By reminding yourself that Hashem is everywhere, sees everything, experiences everything, but I have to review it. I have to review the concept over and over. So the same way that ultimately, again, reviewing the concept makes it part of my consciousness, not reviewing this concept, forgetting this concept, either again as a result of just willful negligence in not reviewing, or because I become preoccupied and busy with other things, and as a result of that I forget, causes me to easily forget. In other words, I will say, which is in general an interesting dynamic in Ruchnius. In many things in life, once you work hard to acquire it, once you have it, it's yours. In spirituality, it doesn't work that way. You have to work hard to acquire it, acquire whatever level of spirituality you're looking to acquire. And even once you acquire it, it doesn't remain yours unless you constantly and consistently try to retain it. Sometimes it's one of the most frustrating things in spirituality, in Ruchnius, right? Because again, I worked so hard to acquire it, and now I think, I've acquired it, it should stay mine. And yet again, one wrong move, one moment of spiritual neglect, and you could lose everything that you've worked so hard for. So I'll say in general, any lapse of awareness ultimately causes one to forget this Yiras Hashem. So he's referring over here to the obligation that a king has upon ascending the throne to write the Sefer Torah. Right? And the obligation to write, why does he have an obligation to write a Sefer Torah? So that the Sefer should remain with him throughout his entire life. Now, of course, you could look at it just as on a physical level. He writes the Torah so that physically the Torah can remain with him. On a deeper level, the Ramchal is saying over here, the goal is that if the king constantly reads out of the Torah, reinforces the tenets of the Torah, then they will stay with him. So I will say, I'll just point out over here, let's finish. He says, so I just want to point out, so remember, the point that Ramchal is making is how does one acquire Yiras HaChet, or I should say Yira. How does one acquire Yiras Hashem? through constantly reinforcing and reviewing the oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and the idea that the Ribono Shel Olam sees everything, experiences everything, and is an ever-present fixture in my life. That is enough, hopefully, to shape how I behave. That shapes the Yiras HaChet, that shapes the Yiras HaRomimos, that shapes Yiras HaOnash, Yiras HaRomimos, and Yiras HaChet. There's a bigger lesson that's being developed over here as well, which is, in spirituality, the only way to be successful in retaining that which you have acquired is constant review, constant reinforcement. If I'm not reinforcing the things that I have gained, they will simply dissipate. An incredible yisod. He goes on halamarata, shina yirin lemedes elamin akriya built in seconds. So it turns out that yira can only be acquired through constant reinforcement. Sheina yira hazos museges beteva, because I will say yira is not something that is naturally acquired. Because I will say yira, and again we're talking about all three forms of yira, right? Yiras ha'onesh, yiras ha'romimos, yiras ha'chet. These are not things that are innate to man. In fact, they're actually antithetical to the physicality of man, because the physicality of man says, I'll acquire and I'll focus on things that I could see, that I could perceive. But things that I can't see and perceive, so remember again, all of these things that we're describing, you can't experience them with your senses, right? These are all spiritual matters. So as such, because they're not physical, unless I constantly reinforce, they dissipate. He goes on, he says, limud yira elabarav hasmada b'torah drachavali hafsek. And the way you learn yira, is through constant review, hasmada, diligence in Torah itself and all of its ways, which we've discussed. So we'll say the idea over here is that a person has to be constantly contemplating this thing. Now remember again, what's this thing? That's how we started this parak. The constant contemplation. Hashem is a fixture in this world. He is found everywhere. He's in charge of every single thing, big or small. These basic spiritual building blocks. I have to review them over and over and over. B'shifta, when I'm sitting. B'lechta, when I'm walking. B'shavcha, when I'm laying down. B'kuma, when I'm getting up. Until ultimately, I reinforce the truthfulness of this thing. So what's the truth that I'm trying to reinforce? Ultimately, again, the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is everywhere, in every place, at every time. And ultimately, again, I stand before Him at all times. When I have, as we mentioned before, when I have this God awareness, remember again, I will say, it's incredible that like all roads kind of lead back to the same place, right? All roads lead back to Zechirus. All roads lead back to Shebisi Hashem and Negdi Samid. Because at the end of the day, God awareness is what shapes spiritual development. If you have awareness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, then by definition, I act differently. I talk differently. I live differently. Everything is different for me every step of the way. Va'azira also be'emes. Then ultimately, again, I will have a true sense of yira. V'mashahayu David HaMelech mispala va'omer, Horeni Hashem darkecha, ahalech ba'amitecha, Yached levavi liyira shemecha. And I will say, ultimately, as David HaMelech said, tell him, Hashem, show me your ways, and therefore, again, as a result of that, I will walk in your truth, and my heart will be singularly devoted ultimately to revere your name. So I will say, so again, it's fascinatingly simple, yet incredibly profound. Create a God awareness, an ongoing God awareness, and ultimately, again, one will come to the three stages of Yira. Yiras ha'onesh, Yiras ha'romimos, Yiras ha'chet. But, lest you think that once you achieve the level of Yira, you're done, locked in, nothing could be further from the truth. In the realm of spirituality, even after you accomplish something, the only way to retain it is through constant review of that particular stage you attain. In this case, constant review of these basic hashkafas of Shivis Yashem and Negdi Samid, constant review or reinforcement of God awareness. And again, without the constant review, without the reinforcement, it simply slips away. With the reinforcement, becomes the guiding light for life. Also, stop over here, shkoyach. Mazel tov on finishing Perach Hafei Rabosai. Very exciting. Next week, we begin the last chapter of Mesillas Yesharim. Last chapter of Mesillas Yesharim, Perach Havav, Emeretz Hashem, to begin on Sunday. Shkoyach Rabosai.